Welcome to the Reimagine Patient Engagement Podcast. This podcast aims to answer the changing dynamics in patient engagement. What role does technology play in the space, and what are the key initiatives and metrics each individual in the ecosystem expects? Let's get started.
Well, welcome to Reimagine Health. My name is Donna Rice, and I'm the host of this podcast. And it's my honor today to have an incredible guest, Andre Herianto. Andre is the Vice President of Finance and Strategy at Vita Health, which is an integrated mental and physical virtual care company helping their members manage chronic conditions, anything from diabetes to depression. He has a diverse background in analytics, private equity, and most recently corporate strategy at Netflix, where his team helped scale the streaming services from 20 to 200 countries across the globe. Well, very, very impressive. So I'd like to welcome Andre.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about your background. Maybe can you just kind of like highlight some of the really important things in your background that you've done, and then we'll get into kind of some more of the questioning.
Yeah, I got into healthcare in the pretty organic way. So, I had, as you mentioned, a pretty diverse background in private equity, analytics, essentially tried, anything and everything until I found myself in Netflix at corporate strategy, where, at the time it was they were at what you call a hockey stick growth, right? It's one of those rare opportunities to be able to be right in the middle of the action and be right in the middle of talented people in the kind of, you'll call it the Silicon Valley heyday, once you take a look at the economy at the moment. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of tidbits of my prior life.
Great. So you were at Netflix for a while, but what really propelled you into healthcare? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, just like many of us, I have my personal stories that exposed me to healthcare industry. And I started realizing the structural imbalance in the industry, right? And I started digging into the space, and eventually I found myself in a space where I feel like, hey, it's really worth solving, and my past experience can actually bring a lot of value, and you can also meet the right people, and here we are. That was the short story. So let me give you kind of the longer story. If we rewind back to 2019, I was with Netflix. I was managing a global team. I was traveling a lot, and let's just say after many, many red-eye flights and steak dinners, my health really took a toll. My cholesterol and lipid panel just went bonkers at the time. And my primary care doc had a break a glass moment, and she just called for a serious intervention. So I started working with the health coach, and in a couple of months, everything is great. We turned everything around, and we became friends. So he ended up telling me the challenge of scaling the health coaching businesses. And the thing that intrigued me the most is, as the personal beneficiary of the service, I started realizing how come something that is so valuable is so undervalued in our society. So I started getting to know his work a bit deeper, and you're a registered dietitian, you can definitely empathize with this, right? So as I started digging deeper in terms of how much care that's required to turn somebody's health around, it just takes a lot of time for kind of one person to do, right? And if you kind of think about it as if you want to make a nice living as an individual with the amount of care that you're going to give, it just doesn't scale. Mm-hmm. And I realized that this challenge actually have a lot of commonalities with how we scaled the studio operations at Netflix. And that epiphany eventually turned into a prototype that I eventually decided to step away from Netflix to pursue that idea more fully without the commitment of the full-time job. And during this exploration period, a mutual connection actually introduced me to Stephanie, the founder of Vita Health. And I started spending more time with the team, and I realized what they were trying to do is actually quite interesting at a really large scale. And we realized that our mission are very aligned. So the rest, as they say, is history. And it's been quite a fun journey scaling that mission across at least 2 million covered lives now.
That's amazing. And, it struck a chord with me because I am a health educator as well by training. And when I look at the complexity of chronic disease, and I just see how difficult it is for a person to manage, and there's a lot of resources out there, but people may not have access to them, nor do they know if they're accurate and credible resources as well. So when you look at the value of that one-to-one coaching and the help that you had, how do you really kind of combine the two? How do you really say, okay, the value of one-to-one, that relationship and all those things that are so important versus how do you scale to 1 million people and really kind of stretch the limits to reach huge populations? So it's kind of like an intricate balance from a quality and cost perspective versus, just really being able to really impact that individual and change the behavior.
Right. It is definitely a delicate balance, right? And this is where I think there is still a lot of innovation that can be done in this particular space. This is a general podcast, not advertising about Vida, but I'll talk about our approach at Vida Health a little bit because it's very unique, right? We differentiate ourselves by that what you'll call that one-on-one coaching, one-on-one relationship, right? But and it differentiates us across some of the other solutions where, hey, here is a device, here is a bunch of blood glucose monitor, and then bye, see you later until 2 months from now, right? That's not our approach. I think we really believe in the value of accountability and one-on-one relationship, and I think in healthcare we call it the therapeutic alliance, right? Where once you build that relationship, it actually touches on one of the biggest drivers of improving somebody's health, which is behavioral change. And I think that is one fundamental aspect that's often forgotten in this Silicon Valley, hey, go, scale things via technology. But so that is one aspect of it. Now let's get to the second piece of your question, which is how you scale that, right? And I think at the moment, when I take a look at things across the industry, we're still at the tip of the iceberg in terms of being able to scale that quality outcome and lowering the cost in general, right? And when I say lowering the cost, it's not about paying the clinicians less or making them work harder. It's really about finding what is that critical drivers among the infinite things that you can do. What are those meaningful interaction that is disproportionately increases somebody's health outcome, and also reduce cost for the system, right? I think that is really the holy grail, the magic bullet, right? That what everybody's working on. We invest a lot in that analytics and provider augmentation. It's not just about the data, but also serving all of those data so that right before a consult, right, you know what are the specific challenges that the member might be facing.
Absolutely. And when you look at behavior change, it's not easy. And it takes time. You don't change someone's behavior in 3 months, right? And it really has to do with support and education and really understanding what's going on in their body. So to me, you could do frequent interventions over a long period of time, or maybe some intense interventions in the beginning and then follow up. And I think each person's different. But I think the important thing, and I love the concept of having like a diabetes educator in your pocket, so you have access to education or resources or tools 24/7. So thinking of that and thinking about the whole pricing strategy and how this works, how do you feel pricing can be innovative in healthcare? I mean, what do we have to do differently? I know we're broken away from kind of like fee for service, bundled payments, but oftentimes those bundled payments, still there's a small amount of what really matters, which is kind of that coaching and that interaction and that building the relationship and support. So how does that all give us some feedback or insight into kind of some innovation in pricing that you might think is important today?
Yeah, I love your question because right now we are living in the age of healthcare renaissance. The buyers are getting more sophisticated, right? They're demanding more, and they're getting savvier after, in the past decade, getting burned with solutions that do not work. So I think there's definitely an incentive out there. And the provider groups, the health plans, the supply side is actually responding, right? There's an endless model out there, PPM, case rate, outside, downside sharing, so you name it. I think there's just an explosion of complexity out there. When I talk to our sales team, though, and this is not just our sales team, but my peers in the industry as well, given that complexity, there is actually a desire not really for more innovation in pricing, but a better alignment between the value creation from the care that we deliver and the value capture, right, from the pricing model. And, those two need to balance out. Companies, especially younger companies, since, we are kind of in a startup audience here, they tend to fall into two spectrums, to the best of my estimation, when it comes to pricing. On one hand, some just follow the competitors. On the other end, they just acquiesce to what the customers are asking for. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a bad approach, but sometimes, depending on, your product and your industry, if you're trying to really drive alignment across, the provider group and the buying group, you really need to understand what the product is solving for and how the buyer perceives the benefit, right? Because what's existing in the industry might not necessarily be a good fit for your product. I'll take the PEPM pricing model, for example, right? Per eligible employee per month, which is a flat rate monthly payment that as a buyer you pay based on how many employees that you have. It's widely adopted among digital health companies because it's really simple, but it often causes conflict of interest down the line, especially if the usage of your product fluctuates a lot. And I'll generalize the advice through this concept called job to be done. That's popularized by Clayton Christensen, a Harvard professor that helped McDonald's increase the sales of their milkshake by 7 times by making the milkshake super thick. And you start asking yourself, how did they arrive at that conclusion? So it turns out they asked people who bought the milkshake this pertinent question: what are you hiring that milkshake for? And it turns out that many male customers, that particular McDonald's shop, are hiring the milkshake not for the calories, but to keep them occupied throughout their morning drive to work. It takes about half an hour to finish the thick and cold milkshake, and it's a good companion. Turns out bananas are not good for the job because they finish too quickly. Bagel and cream cheese, too messy while driving, and candy bars, it's pretty good, but it makes them feel guilty, right? So. And if you apply that concept to this pricing example, you start asking, okay, if I'm hiring this pricing tactic, what am I really asking for this tactic to deliver? So back to that PEPM example, the most common answer I heard is usually they want to appease the procurement and finance department and the buyers by making things easier to budget, right? Instead of really aligning the benefit of your product versus what the pricing is supposed to accomplish. So, and by really asking and digging deep into what is that job to be done, now you can start devising other tactics that can satisfy that need for predictability while avoiding the downsides that's really typically associated with certain tactics, right? So that's how we can really be, creative in aligning value versus, the revenue that you expect to receive in delivering that value.
I love your example of McDonald's. And what really kind of rang true in my heart is that you asked people. And I think getting insight from users or getting insight from people is it's such a value for companies as they build out the right product, correct? And, thinking in terms of that, asking people what they want and then building in, I think a piece that's missing is building in the accountability on the person's side. So when you look at these systems and we look at these pricings, what are the incentives or the accountability that's built in for that person, right? Because you want long-term engagement. And the most important thing is you really want to impact both clinical and behavioral outcomes. So any thoughts around that? I know it's a little bit off, but it's just that McDonald's just kind of rang true to me about really building accountability in on the patient's side or that person's side.
Yeah, actually a couple of things come to mind, right? I think you mentioned the word accountability. Mm-hmm. It is very important, right? Especially in the economics. You show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcomes. And I think if you're a finance person, you want as much revenue as possible, but at the same time, leaning too much on that direction can be long-term unsustainable, right? So there are a lot of public company examples out there. I'm not going to name what those names are, but they were highly successful by selling their products like hotcakes without, I shouldn't say without, but there is a lack of that level of accountability embedded in the organization. So as much as you can, have the conversation with the buyers, have the conversation with the company, and also making sure that it's also aligned with how you deliver care, which is either the provider group that you work or partner with or the internal provider group, right? Having those three-way alignment and then making it work or codifying it in a construct, right? So that all of these three wheels, all these three legs of the stool continue to balance out. I think that is probably one of the keys on, making a sustainable arrangement for all of the three parties. Because in absence of that, you can lean one way or the other, and then, you sign a contract, everybody's happy, but 2 or 3 years down the road, you start figuring out, we're paying for certain things without any proof of, moving the needle on outcomes and medical cost savings.
Absolutely. I love it. And it's really building in all those layers of insight, right? So it's really looking at the providers, the patients, the system, the payers, and making sure they're all aligned. And I think that's really important because a lot of times decisions come from top down. So how do we bring it from bottom up, top down, and kind of meet in the middle? So I kind of love that perspective. So thank you. So thinking about drivers, so what are the most value drivers that organizations see today when buying a product? What are those?
Yeah, this is going to be different, right, by segment. Everybody always think about what is the engagement, what is the outcome, and what is the medical cost savings that you get. I think typically buyers look at those three dimensions, but right now I see there are three macro forces converging, right? So the first one is this is especially true for virtual health or tech-enabled products, right? You're selling to payers and employers, and it's not a secret that both of these buyer types are facing the same issues. They are facing 6 to 7% annual increase in healthcare costs just because of inflation for the most part. The second part is specifically for employers. They're also facing retention and employee engagement issues. Despite the macroeconomic uncertainty, we are still at an all-time low unemployment rate with a super meaningful competition for talent. And the third piece, at the same time, while competing for talent, you're also trying to prepare for an economic downturn, right? So take all of those three together, the confluence of that. You have a set of buying environment now that's more sophisticated because they're expecting more ROI, but at the same time, they're also more cost conscious. Mm-hmm. So this really raises the bar for everybody in terms of how you deliver your solution. And it really benefits those solutions that can demonstrate clear ROI, clear outcomes, and they have a track record of delivering it. And the secondary consequence of that is we are seeing an ask from the buyers in terms of consolidating these point solutions. There's 20 to 30 different solutions, and that gives rise to what I'll call a compound solutions, right? So can you, instead of having the member download 10 different apps for their 10 different conditions, can you have fewer but sharper solutions? So there are a lot of industry surveys out there. You can kind of read the Mercer Stay-On surveys that indicate the employers are trying to start simplifying this set of solutions. I think that's better because it's easier to administer. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's also easier for the member, right? So this really lines up with this whole health, whole person care that everyone is trying to strive towards. And we at Vida, we're a one-stop shop for chronic and mental health solution. We definitely benefit from this macro trend. Yeah,
absolutely. I think one-stop shop is really important. I think the simpler you can make it, no matter what, for everyone. Everybody likes it simple and concise and to the point, and we have to learn to make it easy. And I think that's why you see so many companies merging, like with Fitbit, with this, to have kind of that holistic perspective, but in one spot. And I think that's really important because I think the days, so many people have app fatigue now, going here and going there and all that. So I think that the whole concept of the one-stop shopping is, I think, so valuable to consumers today.
Right, and tailoring it to the individuals, right? Because especially as a startup, it's really hard for you to be good at everything. And even the bigger companies, right? I've never seen any company that's good at everything. I think partnership and kind of working together as an ecosystem and figuring out, hey, let's actually not just consolidate in terms of buy or merge with other company, but partnering through different solutions so that you have this 1 + 1 = 3. It's going to be really important. Once you see certain groups doing it, that raises the bar for everybody else. That's going to incentivize everybody else to actually catch up.
That's great. So speaking of startups, so how should startups look at success and metrics when they're building out for value-based care?
Yeah, this can be a whole different podcast in and of itself, but I'll just try to extract some of the learnings. It's encouraging to see more companies putting more skin in the game, right? To put your money where your outcome is. And one of the things that I learned in the past, especially in the past 2 or 3 years, where there's just an explosion of companies working on value-based contract. A value-based contract doesn't equal value-based care, right? The contract simply gives you access to a population and potential revenue.
Right.
To make this arrangement actually works and sustainable in the long run, you need to design and deliver an appropriate care model along with it. And as a side note, you see there's some public company darlings whose stock prices have been crushed because they got the former, but they cannot deliver the promise on the latter. So I think there are many things that need to happen. You need the right culture, you need the right alignment. But if I were to pick one that's underrated, it's what I would call this critical lever, right? You need to understand the critical lever, what is driving value that's eventually driving revenue. So every time you're going to build a capability to deliver that value-based care, that has to be an ROI positive proposition. It's ROI positive for you because you get to deliver the right care to the member that eventually saves money to the customer. And this is really the money ball of healthcare, right? This is how you really get to that Pareto efficient and how you get to increase the outcome, the quality, while reducing the price. And if for the audience member who's not familiar with Moneyball, it's that gentleman from Harvard who's hired by the coach of Oakland Athletics that really reframed the baseball economics upside down. His epiphany was, you don't buy players in this game, you buy wins. And in order to buy wins, you buy runs. And in order to buy runs, you buy players who get on base, who can eventually get to score those runs and wins, right? So I think the similar lesson can be applied in healthcare because especially if you can take a look at the conventional model, let's just try a bunch of different things and somehow, somewhere it works. And, once you raise the bar in terms of efficiency, not just putting inputs into the healthcare system, then you need to start taking a look at, out of all of these infinite possible actions and interventions that you can take. And typically what we found is there are very few, right? It's the 80-20, the 20% that disproportionately impact the outcome. So to truly build a value-based model, this is one of the capabilities that is critical in driving your financial return as well as health outcomes for the end population that you're serving.
Right. I love the analogy of kind of the money ball because like in healthcare, at least in diabetes, we always say baby steps or small steps, big rewards, right? And the same thing, if just get somebody to get on base, eventually you'll get home runs, right? But if you're looking for the home run king, it might not happen. So I love that, kind of like that whole concept of small steps. And I do think, when you bring it down to the person level, every small change reaps outcomes for that person. And I think you can't, underestimate kind of the value of that. And then how successful they feel about themselves, I think, is another big win. That's probably not a metric or maybe a cost saving, but in the long run it is. So I think that there's like so much beauty in kind of like taking small steps and being really good and making the outcome that you kind of want from that person-driven approach. So all good things. It's exciting to hear that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely spot on. Especially as if you have a company that's serving a larger and heterogeneous population, right? Everybody, as you mentioned, baby steps, but some people actually might respond to different things differently. So I think really building the infrastructure that enables that. And at Vida, we call this, we are turning our clinicians into superhumans, right? So that, yes, you're building that one-on-one relationship and care, but at the same time, you're going to standing on the shoulder of giants by having all of this infrastructure that you can take advantage of.
Absolutely. That support is important. So as a finance and strategy expert, kind of what suggestions will you give startups to find kind of the right product market fit, and how should they think of iterating and entering into new markets? Because I know it's a work in process all the time. So if you could shed some light on that, that would be great.
It is always work in progress, right? That's even for more mature companies. I'm always a bit cautious when giving startup advice because, there are a lot of general advice that can vary by industries and segments, and it always requires some custom building. But I'll try to articulate one of the most common mistakes that, I encounter, whether it's peers or startups that I work with. And especially in healthcare, I'll summarize it as first, you need to know your market, and the second is you need to suspend judgment on things that you think you know. So let's go to the first one first, right? In knowing the market, and maybe I'm projecting myself here, but maybe it's probably going to be relevant to some of your audience as well, especially if they're kind of from the more technology side, jumping into healthcare, which is, a great force in general. I learned that, over the course of studying many different markets, healthcare is probably on the top echelon on complexity compared to other industries that I encountered. There are so many segments, channels, consultants, different payment models, resellers. So it's not enough to have a product market fit. You also need to have a product market channel fit, right? Because it doesn't do any good to anybody if you have a better mousetrap, but no one knows about it. So learning how each channel works upfront, and the buying behavior can save you cycles with, limited amount of capital that you have in the early stage. And, my second advice might be counterintuitive to this one. Yes, now that you know about your market, you kind of need to suspend judgment on what you think you know. Especially as entrepreneurs, we often think about, we have a specific vision on how our product is going to operate and how they're going to be distributed. And especially on the more experienced executives and entrepreneurs, they tend to have a knee-jerk reaction on going to the channels and tactics that they know maybe in the past company. Mm-hmm. And they tend to shy away from things that are outside of comfort zones, right? Like, hey, I like to run performance marketing and I don't like going to conferences, but maybe in the conferences, that's where the buyers hang out, right? So I think everybody can benefit from, instead of starting narrow on things that we think we know well, it's worth kind of starting a bit broad and try all of these different traction channels and kind of continue watching it like a set of experiments, right? And see which one works out. And then as soon as you see that signal, you can double or triple down on some of the channels that's working well.
Right. And I think it's being a little bit different too, because if you look at healthcare in general, like if one company comes out with this pill, right, or a new insulin, then it's replicated. So a lot of times we have a lot of the same and not a lot of innovation sometimes because we just tend to go down one way. And I think if you look at technology too, I think there's so many gaps that could be filled. And it's just how do you know that you're in the right channel or kind of that right, I guess gap is the only word I could think of right now, but it's really filling where the need is, because oftentimes that's where the costs lie too, because people are falling through the cracks or whatever. So it's really kind of like filling those gaps or those needs and being a little bit, I think, creative and different in the market as well.
Yeah, I like your analogy, right? Like there are so many different channels and market segments, and it's always good to think about, hey, maybe the certain need in certain segment is already satisfied. It's a red ocean, and some channels maybe there is a dearth of solution that's a blue ocean. Then you kind of just need to talk to a lot of people and experiment with one of these, right, and see which one has a scarcity for your particular solution.
Absolutely. A lot to do. So you've been so passionate, and you've really kind of been an out-of-the-box thinker as well. So let's just close on maybe sharing some thoughts and ideas about kind of your passion. What is your passion in healthcare, and what do you think, or where do you think it needs to go?
Right. A lot of different things need to happen. It's $3 trillion industries. In that subset, though, one of the areas that I've always been fascinated is this concept of advanced primary care, and how they can disproportionately impact population health. Right. This is one of those areas that's it's not super sexy. It's often underrated, right? Because it's all annual checkup and get to know your diabetes coach, work with your therapist to improve the fundamentals of your health. So it is often underrated because there's not much AI that you can attach to go respond behind it, but the benefit is massive. I'm a believer of this concept that's really well articulated by Chris Chen from ChenMed. He mentioned that what's often most emphasized in medicine, right? What they teach you at medical school, prescription, procedure, and referrals. They make a lot of money, and they tend to give an instant result, but they really only contribute to 20% of improvement in somebody's health outcomes.
Right.
The remaining 80% comes from genetics, behavior change, and what you'll call the social determinants of health. And I think this part about behavior change and the determinants is where primary care can play a meaningful part. Institutions like Iora, ChenMed, Oak Street, they've done an admirable job in re-architecting this stack.
Right.
They're reconfiguring how it works by addressing a very specific population that they serve. But it's only touching a small subset of American population. I think there is another one called Crossover Health. There's another model that I like. They're starting with a few employers, and they're trying to make it more mass market. And, we at Vida are definitely doing our part as well, right, in terms of augmenting all of these primary care providers with our clinicians in our network. But when I take a big step back, as a society, we are still undervaluing it. You heard about how, primary care providers are really struggling to get reimbursement that is commensurate with, their education and the value that they deliver. I think we are definitely still at the 1.0 version of primary care right now, maybe 1.3 or 1.5, but there is still a lot more to be done in something that is so foundational and drives a really large part on improving somebody's health outcomes.
Yeah, I love primary care, and I know that's where it's happening, and I love the term advanced primary care because I haven't really heard of that or thought of it that way. But if you look at kind of the model in federally qualified health centers, how they have kind of like a super model, right? They incorporate all those aspects around like social determinants and, a lot of the clinical things as well to really try to improve health. And I know like Oak Street is doing very similar things, but it seems like they're started in maybe like Medicaid populations or the kind of the uninsured. And why can't this concept really be applied in general? And I think you can do it from a technology perspective as well. But I think, like you said, that's kind of the heart of it. Healthcare, 80% of healthcare is outside of the healthcare realm. And I think you said that well. So it seems like we need to take these models and really kind of, explode them, highlight them. But how do you get the word out? Because it seems like we tend to do the same things. And it's, really looking at models that work and how do you incorporate them in kind of like mainstream medicine and really promote the role of primary care and give them the resources and tools to really do all that.
Yeah, that's where I'm excited for, all of the innovators to come in, right? And, not just adding the technology and operational spin to it, but figuring out what is the right incentive model so that, there is a sea change beyond doing the same old.
Same old, right. And if you think it's, if you had primary care and you had these resources available and those opportunities to work and the primary care provider was really integrated in some of these tools, I think you'd see that you'd have a lot of changes and people would be so much more satisfied and you'd get to some of those health outcomes. But right now it still seems like it's a difficult task because there's only so many hours in a day and they're seeing so many patients. Sometimes there's got to be something that really kind of changes that model and some of the care that's happening in these settings. So this is great, Andre. I think we're pretty much out of time, but I just kind of want to say a big thank you to your insights and your candid expression of what's kind of going on today in healthcare and kind of what some of your beliefs are. And on that note, I just, again, would like to say a big thank you, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast for Reimagine Health.
Likewise. Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate our conversation, and thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You have a good day.
The bigger vision of Reimagine Patient Engagement is to build a community of healthcare transformers working to improve patient outcomes. Patient engagement requires patients to be in the circle of care to ensure that care is holistic and not as a snapshot during a moment of crisis, but as a view that is ongoing, continuously enriched and deepening over an entire lifetime. So, to be part of this amazing community and contribute to the vision, reach out to us at www.connectedcarecircle.org. That's www.connectedcarecircle.org.